Hey guys, my name is Kendrick and welcome to ENFP Mail. Today I get to interview Dr. Dario Nardi. So welcome. Thanks for doing this with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I'll just refer to you as Dario because you mentioned don't use formalities.
The Dario was great. Thank you. Yeah.
Uh, so Dario, before we start, can we do like a little bit of a background information about you? So tell us about your history with personality types with MBTI and also your line of work with EEG.
Okay. Yeah. So I first got introduced to type when I was maybe end of the senior year, maybe in college, by two friends of mine then, one of whom was like psychology graduate student, and the ENFP actually. I took home David Kiersey's Please Understand Me book to my family, and I read it, and I was really interested. And so there's a funny story around it. My mom, she read the book too. And then she woke up the next morning and she said, Dario, I had a dream. She said, and in the dream, it said you need to get certified in this. This is really important. And so I'm like, okay. And so that was my Christmas and birthday present, was to get certified with Dr. Linda Behrens. And I think I did that in 1994. And I started doing some statistical analysis and stuff like that for Linda. And by 1998, I actually co-authored a book with her, mostly involving my editing skills. And slowly but surely, I got more interested in type. I went to conferences like Association. The Association of Psychological Type. And met all of the people who were involved there. I mean, there are just dozens and dozens of folks who've been involved with type since the 70s, many of whom are close to retirement or actually passed away now. But I think for people in the type community, they might really want to know there's like a whole generation before them, which has been very, very involved in a lot of practical ways. And then in 2006, I started with the brain imaging. It was actually a friend of mine, Catherine Hirsch, in Germany, who really she suggested, maybe Dario would be a good person to get involved with neuroscience. It seems like this is an important area going forward. And I'm not the only person. Someone in the 90s, Martha Alcock at University of Chicago, also was doing EEG and type, but she passed away early from cancer. So I think she had one paper out in Journal of Psychological Type, and that was it. And I felt I'd never worked with EEG before. I'm not a neuroscientist by background. That actually even wasn't a major option when I started school in the 80s. So it was definitely like an adventure the first 3 months or so, because first of all, it was amazing to see, because you put the cap on and the person is talking or listening. And my very first subject, who was an ENFJ, is as he would talk or listen, the temporal regions up in front would get active. And I'm just like in the neuroscience textbook, he really had a textbook brain.
Yeah.
And so I just went home that night and I was so excited because I was wow, this actually measures something. That wasn't the only thing. A lot of it came out of it. And so I spent several months with the students, just sort of half dozen of them, having fun and figuring out what can the machine measure, what kind of activities will we come up with. And from then on, for about 5 years, I ran people through this lab at UCLA, and these were all students, usually half a dozen. It was very hands-on, and technically it was a training class. It was how to learn to use equipment and to interpret data and that kind of stuff. Really, really basic, even by the standards of what I do now for analysis. But after 2011, the book I want to say is really important. The book I did is a pilot study. So that's all it is a pilot study, because I really felt it's important to start almost from scratch to find out what variables are worth investigating and to look at the data all these different ways and to really explore. And I felt I got a lot of good insights. And for the longest time, I actually felt type would not come up as significant. I felt the brain is mainly about skills, and it seemed like there wasn't much. But when I actually sat down to do the statistical analysis and see where there were, patterns, I'm oh, well, actually there is. There's a strong statistical bias. And I think this is not a surprise because in the genetics research and the Minnesota twin studies using MBTI, and identical twins, they found like 40 to 60% correlation, which is really quite high for genetics and is great. So it really is, type is meaningful and it's something. And since then I've just been like doing a controlled like 1 hour protocol and like really deepening the kind of statistical analysis and looking more at brain wiring and like now looking at like, of course, I've always been gathering information about career and that kind of thing, careers, age, sex, like the usual demographic stuff, and finding like not just type, but all the other stuff that influences. And that personality, I think if we want to talk about it, we need to talk about development too.
Wow, that's a lot to digest.
Yeah, but that was the whole thing. That was from like 1994 to today. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. I remember watching some of your interviews and you mentioned that you did a lot of brain scans with ENFPs and their brains is like a Christmas light, you said. Same with ENTPs. And I guess that's kind of like one of the best ways for you to prove that, certain types do show certain kind of pattern with their brain scan.
Yeah, yeah. So there, I have a lot of ENFPs. There were 42 when I did a recent presentation. I now think we have 45 because they like to volunteer. I think they're more than any other type right now. But a lot of types we have even like 30 people, and the smallest number is still like in the 10 to 12 range. For like ESTP and ESTJ and so on. I tried to look at like which brain regions are most active in terms of what we call frequency and amplitude. So sort of like with the radio, like what is the pace of the music and how loud is it? And then also looking at the brain wiring, like how the different regions are connected and cooperate. And that's why I say I focus on the most. And then the third thing is like the patterns like you described. Like what are these like broad patterns? Like what gets a person into like this like synchronized mode where the person is like relaxed, but like every part is working together, the state of flow. And I found that actually those show up the most when people are young, and the patterns are not as consistent when people get older. And I don't know for whatever reason, but I'm glad I started with young people. And that's sort of the group where we consider that, people are really like working on and solidifying their type.
So I have two questions in regards to kind of what you just mentioned right now. Why do you think as you get older that the brain activity changes? So, it doesn't light up as much when you check with a scan. Do you think it's because it's more efficient or?
I think that there's probably several reasons. One is that the brain activity seems to change in a way that moves to the person's, how can I say, the things that they hadn't developed or done earlier in life. So that sounds a lot like developing your non-preferences or your like, your like, what would they be called? What is it? The demons as opposed to the saviors.
Yes.
So that's the kind of thing that seems to get developed. That's one reason. Another reason I think is that hormonally people change in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Like even research on couples show that like men and women as couples tend to start looking like each other by the time they get to their 60s. Like they physically look like each other. And that's, as the men, the testosterone goes down. And for women, estrogen goes down, but their testosterone is about the same. So it has some effect. I don't know. So there could be like some natural body changes that happen in the second half of life that influence that. And just people don't have as much energy. I remember talking to an ENTP and, he said like, I just don't have the same energy that I used to get excited about everything. It's like, I need to pick my battles in terms of where I'm going to invest myself. Right. And so in that, he was around 40 then. So I think there's also that sort of mental awareness of becoming more selective. I think for ENFPs, it's like developing standards in a way, like not everything is worth pursuing.
Yeah.
After, it was really fun as a teenager to meet like lots and lots of people. And then eventually ENFPs walk in a room and they're like a party and they're like, well, I don't see anybody here, even though the room is full.
Yeah.
So their interest level shifts and their standards go up. So I think that like it's a combination of type development and just like natural changes that happen with the brain and the body.
I think just based on what you said, like because I tend to follow a lot of the Davesuperpowers objective personality kind of stuff, and they have a Google Doc of all the different types of people that they've typed, and it seems like people of the same type tend to look the same. Like one of his stereotype is that ENFPs that he typed tend to have beards and they tend to have red hair, and so when you mentioned that, as people get older, they start to look the same. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with the brain, because that's, that has a kind of a correlation to what they're finding with the type and looking the same, similar, not exactly the same, but similar.
Yeah. And I assume you mean like same subtype. So you're talking about like the 512 types or whatnot.
Yeah, like let's say an ENFP, and this ENFP is, NEFI. That's kind of how they would.
The way people usually know it. Yeah, what's interesting is when I look at, like, I've looked at ENFPs in depth, and statistically it's neat to see, like, with the younger ENFPs, like the 15 to 25 age group, the male and female ENFPs are really quite different in terms of brain wiring. Then it seems like in the 25 to 55 range, career starts to take over as what's can influence most the brain wiring. Are they in like a business or like STEM kind of career, science and technology, so on? Or are they more in like a humanities, arts, maybe physical kind of career? And so that has a really big impact, which makes sense because you're repeating something, day in and day out for decades maybe. And then in the 55 plus group, actually the difference between men and women, ENFPs, disappears. Like they actually, there's just one generic ENFP that's like a composite of the two.
Yeah.
And has elements of both, which I think is like a huge support for Jung's idea of like the development of the anima or animus, and bringing that into sort of awareness and into the ego structure in some way. And I can see in the brain, like it sort of makes sense in midlife, that as people develop certain brain regions, the wiring is there, like they know how to do their skill, then there's no reason to put in a lot of energy to it anymore. It's like I brought somebody in and he's like a graphic artist and he's doing stuff on the computer. And all of us, like, is he worked on the computer. He had already done this for years, and he actually had grown to like get really bored with his job. And I actually couldn't tell the difference if he were asleep or working.
Oh,
yeah. And so it's like really not, we can reach that point when what we do, like maybe our company or boss like loves what we do, or our clients, and they're like, do more of it. And we're like, no, I'm tired of it. But the brain still has energy, in our 30s, 40s, 50s. So it seems like it then starts to put resources towards parts of the brain undeveloped. And so there seems like there's this natural process, whatever we develop in the first half of life, like the brain is going to be sort of pushing to like go and explore other stuff, the undeveloped things in the second half. Or maybe it's more like second quarter or third quarter, to be honest. I don't know about kids. I don't study kids.
I think when I was watching all your interviews, because before this interview started, I mentioned that I listened to your interview with Personality Hackers, with Benjamin, also with Dr. Mike. And, I think one of the key things that I started taking notes on in terms of like questions I wanted to ask you was that it seems like environment plays a huge role in developing someone's brain, or even kind of like, when you scan people's brain with EEG. In one of your interviews, you mentioned that you got someone with a scan, and at first it seemed like they were an ESFP, but later on you also realized that there's a part of their brain that is more ENTP like. And then when you told this person who wouldn't tell you their type, they actually said to you that they are type as an ENTP, but their mom, the person's mom, was an ESFP. So do you think that environment really plays a huge part in kind of like developing your brain as a result, and
yeah. I do, and so much of what we know just from genetics, and not necessarily using with the MBTI study, but with the five-factor model and with many other things in genetics, that we expect environment to be 40 to 60% of the person's development or expression. Whatever that's going to be. So I think like nature nurture is like a good bet, like 50-50, whatever. Just going in as like a null hypothesis is going to be 50-50. But certainly, when I see brain scans from different people from different cultures, like from the UK, from America, from India, if I had to put money statistically, I would be able to say this one is probably like, say there are three men, this one is probably British male, this one is American male, and this one is Indian male. Not because the American ones are so similar, but because the British and Indian ones tend to have like a lot in common for whatever reason. So I think that culture can have a big effect. America is very individualistic and like lets people develop their brains however they want to, including being idiots. But that's, we have all the options here.
Yeah.
And what was really funny, with the British brains is before I started, there was like, I sort of meant it almost sarcastically. I'm like, oh, let's see if Brits have more developed abstract language skills than Americans. Just because if you've been to the UK, then, their affinity for poetry and sarcasm and really repartee and whatnot, what can we say? Humor is often lost on Americans. So that's the two people divided by a common language. So, but that's actually what happened is actually this like right frontal region, which is involved with abstract use of language, tends to be more connected with British than American subject. Oh. Yeah, so it actually turned out to be the case statistically, and I want to say all of this is just statistical. It's not like a rule-based thing. You're this type, so you're going to have this kind of brain. That's not the case. But there's a meaningful statistical correlation. And so I would say that has a big impact, and certainly a person's career. I believe their upbringing, I haven't studied in depth, like, who are your parents and what type are your parents, and then trying to correlate that. Like, I haven't done that, so I can't really say. But I wouldn't be surprised. And if you're married to the same person for many years, maybe your brains will also be more similar. But although I'm a little skeptical of that, because sometimes couples find ways to actually remain different, but they have like key compromises. So like communication-wise or whatever. But, I certainly believe sex, age, career, in particular career, have big impact. And the way I think of it is that the brain, when we do any kind of neuroscience, the brain we're getting like a snapshot of the developed self. Not some kind of like, absolute platonic self, not just like behavior either. We're looking beyond behavior. So I really believe that snapshot of the developed self, and the developed self includes both the innate preferences or tendencies and the effect of context and environment.
I remember when you were in one of your interviews, you said that the brain of an ENFP, when you scan them in the US versus in Taiwan, I think you used this specific example, there was a big difference.
Yeah. I did have somebody from Taiwan. Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where the cultural differences made a difference in the scan. So even though they were the same type, just based on their geographic location or ethnicity, there seemed to be a difference, just maybe based on the culture or the environment.
I think it's culture. Like I certainly, I've had tons of people come in the United States who are all different, like racial background, ethnicity, and that doesn't seem to be a factor. It seems more like, and I often ask, like, which culture were you raised in through age 12? Like, where did you go to school? That kind of thing. So that seems to play a big factor. It's like, what kind of culture did they grow up in?
Like you mentioned earlier that, Americans tend to have a more individualistic culture. Obviously I have an Asian background, and, from an Asian perspective, like one of the big environmental factors that kind of gets force-fed upon us is is conformity. Like you need to conform to social specific social norms, and you need to live your life a certain way. By a certain age, you need to have this and that. And like there's people like me, obviously, who's more rebellious and be like, you know what, I give that a middle finger. I'm not gonna follow that. But for the most part, if I were to go with someone that's similar racial background as me, they would give me a frown. But I grew up in Canada, so as a result, my background has been influenced by North American / Asian. So it's like a weird hybrid. But I'm still an ENFP, right? So when I talk to other ENFPs, I understand what they're saying. So I don't know where I was going with that, but that was just an observation.
Yeah, no, that's that creates it gives you an interesting perspective. And I do believe the cross-cultural perspective is very important. Just as important as I would say learning about type. Type is giving us like the capacity for psychological perspective shifting. To understand like, wow, as an ENFP, you really do think differently than I do. Like in the way you take in information and so on. People from other cultures, sometimes maybe the cultural difference is not that extreme. I found that Australian brains are not really any different than American brains. Oh. But I think in other cases, if I went and did brain imaging in Japan, for example, I'm guessing that there would be a lot of like with the Indian ones, like back, left hemisphere, attention to detail, a little bit more introverted, sometimes a lot more introverted. Japan is like very conformist culture. And so I do believe that it's a big thing. And the cultural perspective shifting is important too. So, you actually have the benefits of having two perspectives.
That's great. Speaking of this, before you scan someone's brain with EEG, what kind of steps do you take to make sure that they're actually the right type? Because they might be mistyped as someone, and
Oh yeah. So especially now more than ever. When I go to a type conference, a person may be mistyped, but they'll probably only be mistyped by one letter or something. And these are mostly professional people. When I've had people who were say my students, then we have time together so that I can give them reading material and they can do an assessment and they can engage in some kind of triangulation process. Best fit process, reading materials and so on, multiple data points to get down to what is their likely type. In some cases, we didn't always do that. There was a person debating between ESTJ and ESTP. Another one, she was debating between ESFP and ENFP. And it was just a challenge to decide. And I think that's fair. I mean, that happens to people. And I believe that can happen quite easily because of the way the brain is wired and the culture and just natural development. When I see people like that, it's not a surprise. The one who was debating about ENFP or ESFP, she may actually have been an ENFP, but her brain wiring was like an ESFP and easily blended into the ESFP group. Right. And for whatever reason. Statistically, I think people can sometimes be a little bit different. Now, though, I do get more people that I don't really know what their type is when they come in. Because they're recruited by somebody else or whatnot. So, I talk to them a little bit. I find out like what their interest is. I ask why questions, which I think is always useful in trying to discover a person's type. Not the behavior, but like, why are you doing it? What are you getting out of it? So you're coming in to do brain imaging. Like, what interests you about it? What do you want to know? And sometimes it will be something specific, but most of the time the person is just like, oh, I'm interested or excited, or my friend suggested it, whatever it is. I have them take an assessment. Before I had a lot of people who already knew, like who had already been like through that type process. Like when I go to the APT regional groups, like in San Diego and San Francisco and so on. So I would just ask them a little bit like, are you 100% sure of your type, or maybe you're debating? And I would write that down if they're debating. But now they all take an assessment. And I do pay attention to some of the activities during the protocol when they're doing the brain imaging. An example is like there's one that involves words and phrases that they have to use in a creative sort of surprise way. And, I give them a phrase like cell phone, and then they have to make up a sentence to show they understand it. Like, I used my cell phone to call my friend. But then I give them other phrases or words like philosophy oven or cashier of lost souls, and they have to use that in a sentence. And folks with intuiting preference, except maybe for ENTJ, that they get really quickly what they're supposed to be doing, and they come up with examples, and it's really fun. And folks with a sensing preference, or maybe really, really strong thinking preference, that they rebel a little bit against it, or their imagination, they're sort of like, well, philosophy oven is not a real thing, or philosophy oven is a word that you've given me to use in a sentence, which is not creative, but it's, it gives a sense of what the person's interest is. And I watch, because I give in these 20 activities things that involve like math, statistics, drawing, listening to music, looking through photos of people to make a decision, having like an ethics activity. ENFJs, for example, boy, they fly through that ethics activity and value sort activity because they know what their values are and they know what they would do in those ethics situations. It's not some big debate in their minds. Whereas I've really watched some types, like INTP and ISTP, like go really slowly through the value sort. And just like, and it's not because they're confused, like they're putting in a lot of consideration. And really, what do I value actually? If I have to pick top three, or maybe not even liking that they have to pick top three. So there's that kind of data that comes in, and I don't use that for anything except to observe and to learn. Like I don't use that to decide a person's type or whatever. What I do with the assessment gives top three type options to look at. So not one type, but three to look at. And I'm a very strong believer in that. That it is, I don't believe in test and tell, where you, especially pencil paper assessment, and then you call that a test, and then it tells them who they are.
Right.
And so I really believe in showing people that they have a responsibility for know thyself, and examine, your life. And so by giving them three options to look at that were the highest rated, maybe that's ENFP and then ENTP and ENFJ. Or maybe it's ENFP and ESFP and ESFJ. That's actually said, those are actually two different ENFPs, even if they're both really ENFP, like that says something. And they look through those options. I give them the option to look through even more, but I'll tell you, most people don't have patience. Especially if they're sensing thinking type, to be like exploring tons of types. And rarely, I do get individuals, and I have interns here too, and they also get trained in type, so they read type materials, and usually they've approached me and are interested in interning. They're from UCLA, but still, they know me through my work. They look it up. They know type probably. And there's a couple of cases, 2 or 3, where the person, just to my mind, how they scored on the assessment, what the interns thought, and we're like, ESTP, for sure, ESTP. And then this person comes back and it's like, even after consideration, is like, no, I'm an ENFP. This is actually a situation.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this person is not an ENFP. Like there's just the directive language, the action orientation. He sort of comes off as an asshole, to be honest. I mean, he's nice to me and everything, but he's trying to be nice. And he is interested, but his reason for interest is like to serve a goal, which at this point in his life is for personal development. He's like, oh, I need to engage in some personal development. Let me do that.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of amusing. And so I do throw out people from the study, where I set them aside and I'm like, well, as we get towards the end of the study, maybe that will provide some illumination. I really push hard, especially with types like ESTP and ESTJ, to get them to confirm their type, because I really want them in the study. But it happens, actually. It can happen with anyone that, comes along and thinks, and especially people might think, oh, I'm INFJ, and they're really INFP, or INTJ, and they're actually ISTP. And hopefully they're far enough along in their process, and with the feedback I give them. And the nice thing is that the type assessment I give them also comes with a confidence score. So there's that too. So I really do my best with them following up and all of that, and most of them follow up, some do not. And then they just can't be included in the statistical analysis for type. But they still can be folded in with respect to like sex and age and career. And so they're still useful in participating in the study. And of course, they still got their own report and feedback.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's so funny how you mentioned that, as a cross-check, if they're an asshole, they're an ESTP. But anyways.
Well, no, I didn't say
I'm joking.
that.
I know. It's okay. I'm joking.
Yeah.
So I've been dying to ask you, with the objective personality system, Davesuperpowers actually type you as an ENFP. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
A number of people, probably a half dozen over the last couple of years, they're like, oh, I don't know you if you know if, and I'm like, yeah, already some people have told me, yeah.
And then you have they gave you the exact breakdown too. They said you're consume, play, blast, sleep, double feminine. So what do you think of that assessment of you?
So it's consume, play, blast, sleep.
Yeah. So they think your consume's your strongest, followed by play, and then blast, and then sleep is your weakest. And in your double feminine, in your sexual modalities, meaning they say that you're feminine. So if you are an INTJ based on your own typing,
right? Because I have like easygoing extroverted thinking rather than like hard ass extroverted thinking.
Yeah, you don't maybe. Well, the way they define it is, maybe you disrespect the sensory a little bit, or maybe you have a bad memory. And then with the second sexual modality, so if you're double feminine, the second F would be your tribe function, and they call your tribe function for us, for you as an INTJ, it would be TE, your extrovert thinking. So you're flexible with the tribe, you're pretty easygoing with the tribe, but there's certain level of insecurity also when it comes to executing your ideas, and you want to get feedback from the tribe first before you execute something.
Yeah, and I would say that's true, and very much, I learned this process with Linda Behrens about working on a team, and I would say I'm quite a good team player in terms of developing projects and materials. I very strongly believe in feedback. I don't really care what kind of group I'm in. I mean, I feel like I'm a part of a number of cultural or like subcultural groups, whether it's like the type community or psychedelic community or whatever it is. And I can very happily go, like my grandparents were Catholic, and like go to the Catholic church and like talk to people. I don't have like a problem with them. And, understand like their point of view and all of that. That doesn't mean like that's my home or something, but I feel I'm pretty flexible that way. And, I still have I engage this reasoning process quite a bit, and I feel like everything I see or hear, I structure it as it comes in, into awareness. Like I fit it somehow into what I already know and like ways to respond to things. But I feel like I'm really really give a lot of allowance to people and situations. And I feel like, I lived in Barbados for 3 years. I started school there in the Caribbean. I went to school in Japan. Those are two incredibly different cultures.
Right.
I mean, and what is it? They're just very different. And traveling around the world, I find I like most cultures. Like I fit in pretty well. So I like that feature of it. I identify with that. And I would say, yeah, I spend a lot of time. I don't know. I would want to sit down and really think about like how many minutes each day I would spend on like consume and play and sleep and so on, the blast. I might actually like want to engage in that process. I think the important thing to say is this, though, where I think they get ENFP is I made a decision in my early to mid 20s that the way I interacted with the world was not effective, that I was way too introverted and so on. And I remembered as a kid, when I lived in the Caribbean, I was not that way. I had my own inner world and whatever, but I was very friendly with people. I didn't hold back. When I was even smaller, everybody said I was very extroverted. And, it really didn't seem like a good way to, and especially as I was becoming a teacher and having the opportunity to teach classes. And I thought about who talks about abstract stuff, who gets enthusiasm and like, you know, builds bridges with people and everybody likes them. And I'm like, well, that would be ENFP. And I happen that, like, my sister is an ENFP. I've been in relationships with ENFPs. I know them quite well. Best friends, ENFPs. And so it just was a very easy process to engage in sort of this deliberate, like, what are they doing? And I knew about type since my early 20s. So I'm thinking about, it's like the cross-contextual thinking. It's like sharing of stories that sound personal but don't actually give away anything. Like sort of edging into other people's territory a little bit in terms of, like, you know, I make fun of the students and, like, oh, do you have your Adderall prescriptions ready before the exam tomorrow? You know, these kinds of things. And I say that with a little bit of a wink.
Yeah.
And so there's, and I want to stress, those are all learned.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't, like, I have like a study sheet and, like, practice them mechanically, but I made an effort through just simply making that decision that I'm going to absorb that way of doing things. And I had all of these great role models to be able to do that. And even though weirdly none of them are teachers, and that actually has really served me incredibly well. So I feel like my public face to the world that I cultivated is an ENFP face to the world.
Yes.
And that's the energy and the enthusiasm and the sharing and, like, do, and it's like this and that. And I too can make random animal noises, and that's okay. But the fact is, and especially under stress, I have to remember, like, I really need my own time and space. Very, very much, like, even though I can be very friendly with people, even for 2 or 3 days, when the energy disappears, it, like, literally happens in 5 seconds and then it's gone. And I need to retreat somewhere. I can put on that, like, thinking, judging aspect really easily. I have just either learned to not care or be a step above it. There's no reason to go around and, like, correct other people's thinking. Like, it doesn't do anything. And the FJ types get really offended by it. So it's you know, I simply learned to not do that. Even made a choice when I was 13 or 14 to stop being sarcastic. And I had really good British sense of humor before that from Barbados. And then I just decided to put that to the side. So I think it's important to remember that introverted intuiting can do self-shaping and work with the unconscious to do that. And I felt like I do that quite a bit.
So do you think it was, I think earlier in the interview, you mentioned that, you know, it's 50% nature, 50% nurture. So do you think you being perceived as an ENFP is a direct result of nurture? Because you're surrounded by so many ENFPs, you've kind of learned to take on their traits as a result, even maybe mirror their actions, their thought process, their speech pattern, just because, you know, you're around you all day, you know? Do you think that's
yeah, absolutely. It could be, you know, I'm sure that there are also some, like, genetic or biological factors too, you know, that go into it. Like, I'm not particularly athletic, even though my brother and my dad and grandfather were all, like, did college sports. And I think if I were more athletic, then that would have steered me in different directions in life. And I would probably have a little bit more, like an INTJ. I know several INTJs who've been in the military. And simply they're like pretty, you know, I would say, like, stereotypically more like that extroverted thinking stereotype. Not so accommodating, more corrective, a little bit more rigid. They wear armor. It was a tremendous process, actually, to disassemble that armor and to learn to be more vulnerable. And that's recent. That's like a midlife thing. So there's, because, you know, as an ENFP, you can put up a mirror in front of people and everyone will think that you're very open, but in your rapport building, but in fact, there's always this core of you that remains separate. So there, I would say there was a lot of sort of, like, study as well. So I think it really ranges the whole spectrum from, like, some things being biological, and maybe there is a little bit of me. My second type, you know, could be, if we had such a thing as, like, ENFP, you know, that's perfectly fair, you know, if we did that. Yeah. Or it could be all the direction of saying, like, oh, like, I could interact this way with people. Like, I can be sociable with people without giving up myself. And I think ENFPs learn to do that, say, better than some, like, you know, ESFJ or whatnot. So that's a very like thought out kind of thing. So I feel that like it ranges the whole gamut.
So as an INTJ, according to the objective personality system, extrovert sensing is your weakest function. Because the extrovert sensing is your weakest function. They said that INTJs tend to have a fear of chaos happening. So chaos, as in, I'll give you a quick example. So Davesuperpowers, for example, he always freaks out about his printer not working properly. And the way a lot of INTJs described it, when I spoke to them about it, is like they have this like, NI plan that they're going to execute on, in the future. And they're kind of like, they have this laser-like focus to go achieve that thing. And suddenly something in real life like just kills them, like whether like their car breaks down because they forgot to do an oil change, or they forgot to eat. It's been 8 hours, they've been working nonstop, and they just completely forgot about their body. Like in one of your interviews, you talked about people with floating brain types. So like, do you resonate with that at all? Like, do you feel like random chaos comes out of nowhere, hits you, and because you're thinking about this abstract plan that you have in the future, and you're working so hard, and you have laser like focus to it, that boom, reality hits you in the face, like, oh, I forgot to get my car in for, repairs. And
no, I would certainly say a little bit more in the past. Well, no, it was a lot in the past, and now it's somewhat less so. That's how I would say. So an example would be a client comes in and I need to print out, like they're just coming because I'm always like pushing to make use of my time. I'm like, oh, the client's not coming for 10 more minutes. Like I can like send off a couple of emails. Because I feel like INTJs are always overestimating what they can do in like a period of time. Yes. So I never can quite finish stuff. So then I like run in and I'm like, oh, I need to print out certain like the forms for them that they're going to be using during the protocol and to fill out. And then it turns out the printer is out of paper or the printer jams. Yes. And one reason I loved working with technology, being an engineering student, is like once the problem is solved or the machine works or whatever, there's this not just expectation, because I know like eventually the machine breaks down or like the program no longer works because the calls to the operating system are different because the operating system's been upgraded. Like there's those kinds of things. But for the most part, like once you create something, there's just like this joy that it will always work and always be that way. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Like, I don't have to fuss with that. Like, that works and it's great. That's what I love about books, especially physical books. The book is written. It will never change. It's not going to break. Like, it could fall apart or whatever, due to, like, wear and tear of time. But it's not like, oh, I have this Kindle and then the Kindle battery ran out because I didn't have time or I forgot my charger. You know how many chargers I own for my laptop and my phone because I travel internationally, I end up leaving something behind. So this pretty much happens all the time. And I've gotten to this point where I know, like when I travel, I have to have like a list and like go through the list. And then I have to think about, okay, what am I going to forget this time? I know I'm going to forget something, like it's assured. But like I visualize myself leaving the house and about to get into the Uber. And then remember, like, oh, right, there's this other thing I need to get. Like that's like a pre-hypnotic suggestion to make sure like I remember something essential at the last minute. In terms of like rushing or pushing things, it definitely is like a mind-body practice, like a spiritual practice to not get caught up in that, and to be a little bit more easygoing, and to say like, hey, Sarah, like whatever will be. Oh well, and so it's a little bit easier with that. I roll with it a little bit better. I think also because I found as I get older, like I think this happens to everybody. As we get older, it's harder for the body to manage stress, to sublimate the stress. So it comes out in different ways, and people have back problems or headaches or stomach problems or like whatever it is. And for me, it was just like, okay, I want to be healthy and happy. And that's something I learned living in Barbados, that they value freedom, happiness, and what allows that to happen. I really value being healthy and being able to function. For example, like I don't like to drink, for example, and I'm not really interested, even though weed is legal in California. Like that's not something I'm really interested in because I need to think and use my brain. I enjoy doing lots of physical stuff, but I do it either because it feels good or because it makes me work better. And that's, and so it does come down to all of this, like, still even now, it's like a work orientation, goal orientation. And so I very much relate to it. And then when it comes to people, it's, people don't function like machines. So no relationship ever stays static. And so it really involves like adopting a kind of attitude and holding to that attitude that I'm here as a learning experience, that this person is a learning experience, or this is just like a casual interaction and they're basically like an NPC and it doesn't matter. But of course, being very selective about what matters and what doesn't. And that doesn't mean being rude or something, it's just like, it's like a mental practice of being gentle with people, which does not come naturally. And understanding that, people are in all different places in their life. Maybe something bad happened this morning, like really not just knowing that mentally, but like actually feeling that way and behaving that way. And so I feel like a lot of that is getting into like introverted feeling and giving affordance to people and to myself.
Would you say that introvert feeling was something that you really needed to work on as you got older in order to develop yourself better? Is that something that you struggled with earlier on in your life, or is that something that you...
Well, so there's different views about development, and there have been in the type community since like Jung onward. I was lucky enough in my mid-20s to stumble on a piece, like a little few pages of journal that I had kept when I was 15. And it was really sort of neat to have a window on like how focused I was on questions of like morality and ethics. And that really like tremendously bothered me a lot, that when people behaved in a way that they weren't doing the right thing. And so I think that there was a sort of primitive kind of introverted feeling. And I believe that the third function starts to come into people's awareness in their mid-teens, but not in maybe any really useful way. It's just there, but it's not developed. It's like, imagine it's like, instead of being a 15-year-old who has like prefers introverted feeling, it's like a 2-year-old version of it. And I felt like by my mid to late 20s, I got a much better handle on it. And an example is this, that I'm okay feeling sad. And I learned this in performance, in music. Like, I need to play a song that's sad. In order for it to be authentic, I need to actually allow myself to be sad. And then I can get off the stage and I can be happy about successfully being sad.
Yeah.
And so there's like meta emotions, and like the discovery of meta emotions, that was just like really cool. And it gave myself permission to feel a lot of different ways and like to be okay with that, because I know like it's going to change later. Like I'm not locked into something. And I felt like roughly I was there for maybe 20 years, like a combination, but it's sort of like a late childhood maybe version of introverted feeling. And like, yeah, thinking about loyalty and who am I as a person, like who are we? Maybe introverted feeling would say we're the sum of our personal choices. The choices that I have made to define myself, how I treat other people, all of that, like that's who I am. But now I would say that the last 5 years that I view introverted feeling again quite differently. And it actually can be a place that a person can live in, and it involves things like vulnerability, I would say like radical self-honesty, which is quite difficult and painful, and to be comfortable with that. And this is more like introverted feeling with extroverted sensing. This like coming to believe in things through a direct experience and to feel it in your bones, and there actually is no question that it's true. Like there really isn't. I mean, I can point to it and say, yes, that's a belief, but I just simply know that this is true. And it's not from like a head thing. It's from the powerful direct experience. To be able to make oneself vulnerable to actual experiences in a way that they like have a really strong like imprint, and then to learn from that. And then whatever is learned then becomes part of the person's identity. Well, at the same time, I feel like still maintaining that intuiting perspective that like we're all just characters on a Shakespearean stage. We're wearing masks. We have different masks and costumes and props, and we can take those on and off. And we actually, if we really fall into the trap of believing that we're like the character that we're playing, then that's sort of sad.
Right. Wow. Okay. Let me go ask you. So I have some rapid fire questions for you.
Yeah.
While I'm mulling over what you said. The first one I have is you mentioned before in one of your interviews that I think you did this to yourself. So you said that you do meditation, but not because you like it. You actually said you don't like meditation, but you do it because you've heard of the health benefits that it has for you.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I'm accurate with saying this, but I think you said that you actually tested your own brain after you did a meditation, and it said that your brain came out as ISFP after.
Even during the meditation. Yeah.
Oh,
So I had the interns like put the equipment on, and I did the meditation, and I did it before, during, and after. And yeah, the brain wiring and activity were just like, and I like if I just looked at it generically, I would say, oh, this person is an ISFP with like
right.
strong intuiting, but like ISFP. And I've seen an ESTP come in who was in his 60s and who has had a very varied career and ultimately ended up being like Native American shaman, among other things, as well as still like a business consultant and all of the things you might expect of sort of typical American ESTP. And, you know, when he went through the standard protocol, actually, he was just like bullseye statistically the same as the other male ESTPs. But when he did his 1 hour of like shamanistic stuff, which didn't involve any substances, like it's just like, you know, like meditation and breathing and like working with another person, it ultimately is part of, you know, like a healing experience or whatnot. That looked, the brain wiring and everything looked just like an INFJ.
Wow.
Yeah. So I believe that it's possible for us to get into spaces that are opposite type. Part of me wants to say that for anybody of any type, if you like meditation, you're not doing it right. Because there's a certain element that will always be miserable if you're pushing yourself. I've certainly learned that in yoga, but then the payoff is really fantastic. And I think a lot of it was, it's not that I dislike meditation. It's just that I was doing the forms that weren't right for me. That, like, for example, I'm just not good for hatha yoga, but Kundalini yoga is great. And just like ways to calm my brain, like closing my eyes is really a challenge because my imagination gets very active, but stuff with the eyes open that's focusing works very well. So there, and then the benefits are tremendous. Just like, and I've really tried to research it from a scientific perspective, like the breathing activity and how that changes the vagal nerve system in the body. And then that leads to like the parasympathetic response. And so I can go in that direction, but ultimately I would say like it's just a really great spiritual practice for anybody, provided that's actually where they are in their life. Because like anybody can do yoga, but that doesn't mean they're going to get like some spiritual benefit or meditation or whatever. But I think it can be like a doorway to not just spiritual development in general, but to type development.
Would you say we as humans are able to develop subtypes or subskills? Because you said the ESTP, when he started doing his shaman stuff, he became more INFJ-like. Mm-hmm. For you, when you meditated, you become more ISFP, and then the people in the outside world will accuse you of being an ENFP. So you're wearing so many different hats here, right? You know, so it seems like, you know, even as I don't want to say this, but maybe a fake ENFP, you know, like you're doing a good job at fooling people, you know? So, you know.
Right. Well, you know, it was Courtney Love who inspired me. And she said, I fake it so real it is beyond fake. Yeah. And to me, like, but I'm not doing it for social interaction or to be that, but it just, I believe that there's, like, it's almost enjoyable to like take on different archetypes and to experience that. And it's, it's something that apparently like I'm decent at. And so why not? And I believe anybody can actually develop different skills, because skills are not the same as psyche. Brain and mind both they're different from each other, and again, they're not the same as psyche. And just this idea of exploring different aspects of oneself, that's ultimately what I feel it is. And this like kind of self-development, but the whole idea is to open doors and windows and whatever, and to go through those, and then to see what is on the other side, and how will that change me as a person, while still being me. And that's, I don't know, it's just like a fascinating process.
Well, it sounds like anyone can do that, and there's certain skills that they can kind of, like you said, fake it till you make it, until it's not fake anymore, or something like that. It's now you. It's now part of you, or your identity, essentially. My thought process just disappeared here for a second, but basically, if we, because I think I took a note here. You said that you did a study before where an ESFP looked out of the window and they had more brain activity when they were looking out of the window.
ISFP, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, ISFP. So it seems like as humans, we have this ability to take on the hats of other types, and not just take on the hats of the other types, but make it our identity and become quite competent at a certain level at using their specific skill set, as a result. Like you talked about an INTJ going to military, versus like another INTJ who's just a nerd living in a laboratory, right? It's like, it's completely different people. So we'll just leave it at that for now. But because let's go jump into my last question to you before we kind of wrap this up and talk about like how people can reach you and stuff. What do you think of the Enneagram? Do you think it's valid? And
I don't even think there's been an attempt to validate it in sort of a scientific sense. I do like the Enneagram as a therapeutic tool. I really enjoyed the 2 Enneagram conferences I've been to, because it deals so much with emotions and defenses, which are 2 things that the Myers-Briggs stuff is sort of weak on, or doesn't address. I have to say the conferences were more lively than the type conferences, because maybe the people are just less in their head. And the workshop was really, really tremendous in terms of helping people shift into and develop resources of an Ennea type. Basically, we'd say like a point on the Enneagram, which is not their home base. So like I worked on Ennea type 8, and it was like an afternoon workshop, and she was just fantastic. I still remember sort of the anchoring techniques for it. And so I believe as a therapeutic tool, and possibly in like the creative arts, for example, it could help with like story writing and that kind of thing. That's sort of where and I feel like its best application is to type people. It's really about like actually identifying where a person's fixation is, and then helping them loosen up, in the same way that, like yoga or whatnot, stretching is about loosening up and becoming more flexible.
Gotcha. And what type are you, would you say?
So I'll just right off the bat say I believe I'm like a 5-wing 4.
Okay.
However, when I first took the Enneagram like assessment, I took one in my early 20s, and I came out as type 1. And then when I retook it again, maybe 5 years later, I came out as 7. When I went to the conference, which was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, someone told me that nobody on the council, their organizers council for the conference, could actually figure out what my Ennea type was.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really great. But I think when we clear away sort of all the clutter, there are certainly some types I'm not, like not 2, not 3, not 8, not 6. And so there's a certain, and then I sort of have to be honest with myself. And it's like, in terms of like some of the the defensive behaviors and so on. So I believe that if I had to pick a type, it would be 5 wing 4. But I really do identify a lot with like 7. And, I used to be a 1. I think that did not serve me well. And right now in my life, like 5 wing 4 serves me pretty well. Certainly in my 20s, later 20s and early 30s, like 7 served me very well. Like it was a really good place to be in. And now I believe that the developing more 8 would be very helpful for me. Understanding that's not like the asshole version of 8. It's like the strong, generous version of 8.
Yeah, the Maximus from Gladiator version, not.
Yeah. The person who is so confident in his strength or endurance or whatnot that he can afford to be generous, and that's sort of like the cultivate that mindset.
Got it. So we're gonna wrap up the interview, but so we're gonna go talk about your stuff now, your books, how to find you. So I do have one beef to pick with you, is that your books are not available in Canada on Amazon.ca. So I looked it up because I was trying to get as much information about you before starting the interview, and I was like, I can't even buy your book in Canada, on Amazon.ca. So
It's very strange because a lot of my books now are actually printed by Amazon KDP, which is Amazon's own printing company. So whenever you place an order, they print and fill the book. And my books are available in like Australia and Japan and Germany. I don't know why they're not available in Australia. In Canada. It is sort of odd, but I know that they have a list of like a dozen countries that are sort of automatically allowed, and then other ones you have to go through special hoops to like make that possible. And so it's a little unfortunate. But I've been trying to make them more available. Sorry about that. Yeah,
it's okay. I even went to the public libraries. Like they have like literally like I check out 4 different libraries. They only have one of your books, and it's from 1999 or something.
Yeah, we never made a push. I mean, for most of the time, my books were published by Telos Publications, and they never made a push to be in libraries. And almost everything was business-to-business sales. And I would say even now, a lot of what I do is business-to-business. But I am trying to be like more available and just have everything automated on Amazon. I realize like wasting time on logistics is not really good use of my talents, and it stresses me out. So I can do it. It stresses me out. And better to just like let Amazon do everything. And I don't like Jeff Bezos, but but Amazon works. Yeah.
I also noticed you don't have any Kindle also like version of your books.
Oh no, but I do have some of the books on Kindle, but the neuroscience ones, okay, so the ones that are co-authored, my co-author won't allow them to be in ebook form. She doesn't want them in ebook form.
I see, gotcha.
And then the ones that are mine, I've had it on my to-do list for like 6 months.
Yeah.
To have them available on Kindle. And it will take like a full solid 8-hour day in order to convert it to Kindle format. To like get out all the bugs and to like transfer the diagrams and all of that. And I've just, I think it's important to remember, like both you and I are both dominant intuiting types.
Yes, I was going to say that actually.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, like it's, or any time of the day, actually, sometimes I just like rather do my own stuff, like wherever my imagination takes me.
Yeah.
And be like, oh gosh, I like have to like make a Kindle ebook.
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't excite me, even though I really want to have it available and I know how smart that is. And I'll buckle under and I'll do it at some point. Yeah. But I would say if people come to my website, that they can get an ebook version directly from me, and then I make more money from it. So there's and at least, but I have to do the conversion in the next month because I'm like transitioning my whole life and my business to be like digital nomad and to not do any logistics. So I'm you catch me as I'm making like a really big transition in my life. And I'm very excited about it. So to actually do extroverted sensing, like to buy a one-way ticket to Norway, not knowing where I'm going to be living after 2 or 3 months is a little bit scary.
Yeah.
But I know I can do it. So it's
So you're becoming a digital nomad then? Is that your plan in the
I
future?
am. That is my plan. Yeah, by mid-July at the latest, to spend my 50s as a digital nomad.
Wow, that's incredible. Um, I'll ask you some questions about that after the interview. But so Dario, how can people reach you? How can people find you? How can people buy your books? Buy your I don't your scanning service?
Mm. Well, the best way to find out at least what books I've done or whatever, there are two places. One is on Amazon, and a person can just type in my name, or they can type in neuroscience of personality, and then they'll find other books suggested with that too. For people who like games, like tabletop RPGs and whatnot, if they go to, they'll probably know this place, drivethrurpg.com. Then they'll find like I have an equal number of books that are all just like fantasy and science fiction game books, which is like one of my like useless hobbies, but actually I just really love it. So it's I can't help it. And actually they don't sell so bad. They don't sell so bad. I figured I probably lost money in terms of time, but who knows? In terms of the workshops and brain imaging services, so far, I've usually been in Los Angeles, and that's the best place to find me. Occasionally, I'm in San Diego, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Sydney, Melbourne, Paris, London. Those are probably the top spots. I've never had anyone from Canada like invite me to Canada to do anything. So it's that hasn't happened yet. I have been to Toronto once, and I've never saw a thunderstorm and like a smog alert at the same time, but that's what I caught. For those, like I would say, like because it's a physically located thing, a lot of people find an excuse to come to Los Angeles. But now that I'm going to be a digital nomad, I would say probably a better chance of catching me in Europe than in LA in the coming years. But who knows? I would say in terms of, email me, go to darionardi.com, and like my email address and like all of that is there. You can contact me either at like the Gmail or the UCLA address is fine. Yeah, I do get several emails a week from people who know about me. Some of them are sort of weird emails, but I try my best.
I'm not gonna ask.
Yeah, I was going to say the most likely way that a person is going to get a response is if the email is short and to the point. And don't end it with like, if you don't respond to this, then you're a bad person kind of message. I'm not going to, and if you mention something about how I might be able to help you with your mental illness, that probably is not going to get a response from me either.
Yeah.
And I do get that from people. Also, for anybody who's working on your own model of type and you want feedback, I'm not the person to come to. Like anything that would help you is like already out there, in like many forms. And I simply don't have time to absorb that. In fact, I would say my theory on the theory side of type, I'm not really that interested anymore in it. Like I'm very interested in type development activities and practices. But in terms of the theory, not so much. I'm glad other people are still working on it. And I think it's important to recognize, like, for every person who's like really getting into type, it's also a personal journey, whatever project they're working on. They're trying to internalize type and make it meaningful to themselves. And Jung would be very proud of them for doing that, I think.
All right. Thanks for doing the interview again, Dario. It was incredible. I felt like I have so many questions to ask you. Obviously, in respect to your time, I need to stop. So I did my best to just cut it off, but our desired ending time. But thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it, and hope that people buy your books. I will try to buy your books if I can get them in Canada.
Well, I would say send me an email, and then I'll make it happen. So you don't have to go through like tons of complication. At the very minimum, we'll get you the Kindle ebooks.
Yeah, that would be good. All right, so I'm going to hit the record right now. So I'll just say goodbye to everyone.
Thank you. Thank all of you for listening.
And